welcome to the BlinkOn breakout session for trusted web activities, custom tabs, and browser on Android. So, first things first, who are we? We have Andre.
Hello, I'm here. I'm Andre, developer advocate working on web on Android. Yeah.
Chirag.
Hey there, I'm Chirag. I'm the product manager for custom tabs and WebView.
PJ.
Hi there, I'm PJ. I'm product manager for trusted web activity and installability on the web.
And I'm Peter Conn. I'm the tech lead for TWAs and for custom tabs. So, just in case anyone's stumbled into this meeting by accident, what are custom tabs and what are trusted web activities? On the left, we've got an example of a custom tab. Basically, any Android app can open a browser tab. It's themed. It looks a bit more like the app. The user stays inside the app, whereas previously programmers had a worry that the user would kind of go to a full browser and continue their web browsing experience somewhere else. And then on the right, we've got a trusted web activity. This is basically a full screen custom tab that's you've got to jump through a few hoops. So you can only display websites that you own. Trusted web activities, the main use case at the moment is pretty much taking a web app and wrapping it in a trusted web activity to put in an app store. So what is new? About 2 years ago now, the Android support library got relaunched, rebranded as Android X. So where this API lived, the custom tabs Android support library has now been moved to AndroidX.browser. So about a year ago now, we finally had our first launch of Android X browser with kind of new features. Well, first though, a deprecation. So one of the tragically underused features in the custom tabs API was the browser actions, which would essentially be a browser-powered context menu. There were a bunch of cool things you could do, but no one ever really adopted it, and I think no one other than Chrome really implemented it. So ultimately, we got rid of it to simplify the API. We added support for dark themes. So when you're launching a custom tab, an application can kind of provide a bunch of theme colors for light theme, a bunch of theme colors for dark theme, and then your browser will be able to figure it out for you. And kind of the big one, we launched trusted web activities. So alongside that, and alongside the launch of trusted web activities, we created a new library called Android Browser Helper. Android X is part of the Android framework, and so it's got to go through those like kind of quite stringent API reviews. And they generally move a bit more slowly, and they want to be totally agnostic to browsers, such like that. Whereas, unfortunately, for better or for worse, when you're creating a trusted web activity, there are kind of like some hacks or bug fixes to work around older versions of Chrome. And generally, we created Android browser helpers to be a bunch of kind of sensible defaults and easy to use templates for users building trusted web activities, or in the future, maybe using custom tabs. Custom tabs on their own are pretty simple to use, so there's not that much of a win by using Android Browser Helper. But as we add more features, we could potentially see Android Browser Helper as being our go-to, what we recommend developers use. Yeah, thank you, Andre. And yeah, actually, over to Andre.
So yeah, as Peter mentioned before, one of the main goal we see today for trusted web activity is for developers to take their existing PWA, wrap that into an application, and make it and publish that on app stores. And most developers do not have knowledge on Android development, so we created a tool for them. So this is more geared towards the developers who want to use it. It's a Node.js tool. They can point the tool to their web manifest, and it is going to produce a package that they can just publish to the App Store without actually having to touch any of the Android stuff. So another interesting piece of news is that back in 2015 when we launched, we used to call it Chrome Custom Tabs. But nowadays, I think most browsers on Android support the protocol. So we've been calling it Custom Tabs only for a while now, and we have officially rebranded to Custom Tabs. So that reflects that many more browsers support the protocol. And finally, since many browsers already support both custom tabs and trusted web activity, we were asking this question, and that the APIs for both features are primarily developed by the Chrome and Android team. And is there an opportunity for us to work better with other browsers and develop those APIs together? Listen to the features that are needed and work on this together. Which then brings up the things we think might be an appropriate discussion for this session, which is for other browsers, how important do you see custom tabs and trusted web activities? How much of the Chromium Android code do you use? How much of the custom tabs and trusted web activity implementation you can reuse in your app? Are there things we could make it easier for you to reuse? Would you be interested in participating on developing on the API design for Android X web browser and actually also Android Browser Helper? Any missing features? Anything we could do to help you? And around that's a very interesting conversation we have multiple times about should trusted web activity have a post message channel to the Android, to the native part of the Android application.
I could have sworn I had seeded a question in to prevent this awkward silence. Is Ryan not on this call? Ah, Ryan, what a surprise.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, this is all super interesting, but I was wondering what future plans do you have?
Yeah, so kind of what we're currently working on. We're working on a few trusted web activity-related things, most notably play billing, which would be great to kind of have wider support. I think from a custom tabs point of view, our privacy team is working on making incognito custom tabs work. So yeah, you launch custom tab and it is launched in incognito. It's going to be initially launched for first parties only, just kind of for some branding issues. But yeah, we're hoping to bring that to third party users as well.
Yeah. By the way, the incognito custom tabs is one interesting example of and something that it would be very interesting if we could do better in the future, because with time, custom tabs got many features, and I think it was really hard for other vendors to catch up and keep up with everything that was being added. So, and I think that's one area that we could do better in both custom tabs and also prevents that from happening in a way in trusted web activities.
Danielle?
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious. Do you have anything? Have you heard from web developers who have tried TWAs, trusted web activities, and what are their feedback? Do they find this? I'm just kind of curious because I'm new to this space and kind of curious in the kind of the customer feedback for these APIs we're building so far.
Andre or PJ, do you have anything to say?
I think so. We've got relatively good uptake. Andre, I don't know if you have more up-to-date information. Last time I looked, we had 7,000 to 8,000-ish apps that were using Trusted Web Activity in the Play Store. So there's reasonably good uptake there. The main piece of the feedback that I've seen have been more along the lines of like the little ways that the trusted web activity looks and feels different than a native app. And then some of the issues that developers have navigating through the process of uploading and managing an Android app in the Play Store, which web developers are not familiar with, and which is kind of a complicated process.
Follow up to that. So these sounds like a developer ergonomics issue. Just kind of curious, are these things that we can do to help solve, or do we have to rely on the Play team and Android team to help solve these problems?
Some of these we've tried to address with a library called Bubble Wrap, which is basically an assistive developer tool to help developers succeed. I'm not sure if Andre, you're still there. You want to speak a little bit more about that?
Yes, I'm here. I was just getting the link. So if anyone wants to check it out, that's Bubble Wrap. So it's basically a command line tool. You can it's based on Node.js, which we hope most developers, most web developers should already be familiar with, and they can just point the tool to their web manifest, run Bubble Wrap in it. It's going to read the values from their web manifest, and then it's going to generate the whole source code for the Android app. But even then, they don't have to. Even when building the app, they don't have to touch Android. They can just do Bubble Wrap build, and then it's going to generate an APK or an app bundle file that they can just take that and upload that to the Play Store and have it deployed on both Android and Chrome OS. So we hope that this has removed most of the friction web developers had on the tooling side.
Cool. So just to answer a question that was asked in the chat, what are the core differences between Android System WebView, custom tabs, and TWAs? Which of the three do you see developers utilize the most? I guess the big distinction is between WebView and the other two. WebView is it's a view instead of activity, which means it can be kind of part of the screen you see, whereas the other two, the web page takes up the full screen. With WebView, I think with custom tabs and trusted web activities, they share state with Chrome. So if you're logged into something they share state with the browser. If you're logged into something with the browser, you'll be logged in there as well, whereas WebView doesn't share state. WebView also has much more limited web API support, so things like service workers, things like web payments won't necessarily work there, and something else. I can't quite remember that at the moment. I think ultimately, if you had a progressive web app and you wanted to upload it to the Play Store, we would recommend you use trusted web activities. If you want to do some general purpose browsing to kind of web content that you probably don't own, use custom tabs. WebView is good for kind of first-party content you want to modify yourself. It's good for files that you want to store offline, and I think it's used a lot for ads. Chirag might want to refine that answer a bit.
No, I think you did a good job. I added some extra things that you just mentioned in the chat as well. If there are still questions about WebView and you want to talk more about the differences, we can just let us know.
This is great. Thank you so much. This is good to know.
Okay, cool.
Could you talk a little bit about the second part of the question as well? Which ones of these do you see more usage from developers?
It depends what kind of usage you're interested in. If you're interested in full screen browser-like activities, I need to go and check the numbers for you. But WebView is like definitively by far and away like most used because it's used for so many use cases. I think almost every app on Android uses WebView in some way or another. So the usage is high, but you need to break it down by use case.
Got it. Cool. Thank you.
Cool. So I think Mahesh was next.
Hey everyone, my name is Mahesh. I'm a product manager of Samsung Internet. Just to quickly answer the first question on how important is custom tabs, it's very important for us. As you know, it's heavily used by a lot of developers and apps like Twitter's to launch the links from their app through the custom tab and utilize the passwords or cookies or whatnot from the browsers that they use by default. That based on that, that brings me to the next question that I wanted to ask, Richard. It's a two-part question, specifically on the incognito mode support for custom tab. What would be a common use case? What is the use case that you're trying to build this for? My first question, and second, when you say first party only, does that mean Google App Store or browsers or like something like that?
Yes. So first, the use case. I think it was maybe like kind of one version, two versions, maybe even three versions of Android ago, where kind of one of the big themes for Android was privacy. And with that, quite a lot of Google apps like Google Maps or the Google Search app kind of launched these incognito modes as well, like kind of stealing the name that Word originally came up with. But the idea is that you could like kind of go and search for something on Maps and it wouldn't be kind of saved and you wouldn't get suggestions for it later. I think both Maps and GSA want to be able to kind of open web links occasionally, and it would be a bit of a break in their product if you were in incognito mode, then as soon as you started browsing, then it actually just went to your normal kind of Chrome history. So I think that's the primary use case kind of in terms of those apps. I do know that this is something we've had some kind of external developer requests for. Otherwise, when I say first party only, I mean, as far as I know, it will initially only work for kind of Google apps, so Maps or the Google Search app. I very, very much dislike any first party only things we've got in custom tabs. And I think we are on track to bring it to kind of a wider audience. It's just a case of, it's more of a staged rollout type of thing to make sure we don't launch anything with massive privacy or security holes in originally.
Got it. Thank you. Just a follow-up question on that. So for Maps and Google Search, you're saying these potentially launching a custom tab in incognito is same as a web view. If a service would use a web view, right? It basically does not get into any history, does not use cookies or anything. It's just to maintain the implementation. And there are certain cases where we don't want the history to go into browsers. That's where we need to use incognito.
So yeah, but the differences between WebView and custom tabs, you've got the shared state, which won't exist for incognito, but you also have basically the better API support. So off the top of my head, I can't think of a kind of modern web API that you would still want to use in incognito, because maybe payments, I'm not sure, but you will kind of get a better experience with that. I think also from the user's point of view, there is a big, there is a wall between what the user does in a custom tab and the embedding app. So if I open a custom tab, I enter my password in, the browser sees that, the launching app doesn't. If, on the other hand, that's in a web view, the embedding app can see everything you type into a web view. So it's not necessarily something that the user notices or fully appreciates, but we believe that using custom tabs is kind of better for security and privacy that way as well.
So I can add an extra use case for incognito. So this was feedback from a developer a while ago, a few years ago, a developer of an app called Flamingo, which allowed you to log into multiple Twitter accounts and manage multiple accounts from a single app. And the problem they had with CCT is that the first login would work fine, because like you were already logged into Twitter in the browser, so the auth flow would kick off, then you would go back into Twitter, and then you would be logged into your account. But adding the second login was a problem, because when they tried to do that, you were already logged into the browser, so it would just get you back into the same account. And that's one of the reasons that they wanted to have an incognito mode, so that from the second login onwards, they would fire an incognito window, and then you would get a fresh login into Twitter.
Interesting. Okay.
Cool. Laszlo?
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to echo a little bit about what Mohammed said. I think based on what I heard, the incognito mode custom tab sounds pretty interesting for us as well. And I wanted to learn a little bit more about the last point about trusted web activities for post message. Would this create a new Android API? How would this work? So I sort of have a sense of use cases. I just want to understand what would be the impact of this if we do this.
So, funnily enough, the post message API is something that was created quite a long time ago. So before I started working on custom tabs, kind of 3 years ago. So in terms of an Android API, this already exists. With the idea being that somebody can launch a custom tab, and as long as the digital asset links verify, the Java application and the JavaScript inside the web page can basically chuck strings to each other and do things. We've explicitly disabled this for trusted web activities. The reason for this is that we really don't like this idea, because whenever somebody does something with post message, we've no idea what they're using post message for, and it means that their website is only going to work when run in a TWA on Android. It kind of gets rid of that cross-platform nature of it. And we would much rather people use kind of standard web APIs. And if people start using post message for something and then we come along and create a web API for it, they're not going to move. They're just going to kind of stick on this kind of older, potentially more insecure kind of way of doing things. So it has been something that we've been asked for quite a lot. And we really, really want to find out what use cases developers have for it, because we'd much rather solve those in different ways. But it seems to be very much a fear of missing out kind of thing. People want this escape hatch because they kind of want the safety of knowing they can do it if they need to, not necessarily because they need to right now. PJ has been thinking quite a lot about this.
Yeah, okay, understood. Just to summarize my understanding, so it's kind of a question of incentives, and maybe we should make it super hard so that it's, you know, they only use it if they really, really need to. But okay, I got it. Thank you.
Mahesh, did you have another question? Or you got your hand raised, so I'm just checking. Hand's gone down. Okay. Anyone else have any questions?
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
All right, I have a question. So Peter, you mentioned that WebView doesn't have a lot of the modern web APIs, and that's one of the difference compared to Chrome custom, compared to custom tabs and trusted web activities. At the same time, we also know that a lot of apps still use WebViews. So I'm kind of curious, what is our bar for adding new APIs into WebView? When does it make sense to port a new API into WebView, and when does it not make sense?
I think Cher can probably handle this one.
Hello there. This is something that we're looking into as a team right now to understand the gap. And I don't think it's a question of should we just put every single API in WebView? Maybe some of them don't make sense. We're doing an analysis that Peter, who are both on this call, have been looking into around what are the most commonly used APIs and do they exist on WebView? Does it exist on iOS in their WebView? And then what kind of negative user experience does that lead to if that API is not available? And also what kind of negative developer experience does that lead to? So we're doing that analysis and trying to figure out how best to serve for browsing cases on Android. I don't have a clear line that I can draw in the sand for you about where the bar is. Maybe Peter, whoever you want to jump in there, but it's something that we're looking into. And when we feel that there is a user harm or user need that is not being met through missing APIs, then that's when we'll consider adding stuff to the WebView.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that. My name is Peter, also at Google. Another Peter. The way how we think about this, what Peter Conn already mentioned, is that WebView has a number of use cases that are quite different from Chrome custom tabs, that are quite different from the browser, which are quite different to some of the other things that we're working on, such as WebLayer. And we'd really like to get a better understanding to just know to basically figure out our position, what Shark is mentioning, which components should be used for which use cases. And that very much will influence what sort of APIs would be appropriate. So to give an example, WebView is very much used for meta platforms. For example, you can think of things like super apps, things like Cordova, that create an abstraction above Android, above iOS and other platforms to make sure that even for things that are not web APIs, things can run with the same source code on top of those. And that is a sort of requirement that is quite unique, that is quite far away from the web, but that is a use case that we might want to answer in one environment, but wouldn't be appropriate for the other environments. And that's really part of a learning project that we're working on right now.
I think also there are just kind of one or two technical considerations, like so custom tabs, trusted web activities are both hosted in the browser, so the browser can then take push notifications and display them, whereas a web view is just kind of a little view part of the embedding app, so it can't really register anything in with Android to kind of accept these things. So and additionally, a web view, the life cycle is tied very much to the Android app. It has no control over the life cycle. So things like service workers, again, they're trickier at least to implement in WebView.
Just to follow up on, I think, what the other Peter said. The criteria of making sure that the developers who use WebView and they should be able to maintain and run their code, run their app onto different OSs. So is it fair to say when a new feature needs to be added to WebView, so Chromium team would consider if the feature is also available in iOS WebView, and then it's one of the criteria that makes sense to add it to Google, the Android's WebView?
I think we're building different browsers for different platforms with different capabilities. And I think right now, if you look at sites like Can I Use, it's pretty clear that feature support, particularly for PWA features, is all over the place. And I really can't comment on what Apple's going to do in that regards. I think there's a pretty clear message from developers, particularly frameworks such as Cordova, super applications, categories of apps like that there's an interest, a demand in something that's between the two, right? You want to deliver what your users want, the sort of really low friction cost of switching between experiences, while at the same time you want to preserve the properties that make the web platform the platform it is, the openness, the shareability, and that is something that is difficult for any single party to control.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I just asked this as an example, using payment APIs, for example. Payment APIs are not on WebView. If we need to have payment API on Android WebView, does it need to be a criteria that that iOS WebView need to have it too, or something on those lines? Just to cross check. Doesn't seem like it, as long as it's only available on Android.
Cool. Anyone has any last questions? Now's a chance to get them out. In which case, that brings us nicely to time. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming along, for joining in. It's good chatting. Yeah. See you all tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.